There is a specific kind of danger in raising a daughter to be perfectly compliant. You teach her to smile at the dinner table. You teach her never to ask questions about adult finances. You groom her to accept the scraps you hand her while you feast. But the flaw in that design is simple. A quiet daughter misses nothing. She watches. She remembers. And when you finally slide fraudulent paperwork across a steakhouse table expecting blind obedience, you have no idea you are handing a loaded weapon to someone who has spent the last month learning how to aim. My name is Journey Scott. I am 30 years old. Right now, my mother, Evelyn, is sliding a cream-colored folder across a pristine white tablecloth. She taps her signature teal pen against the polished mahogany, waiting for me to take it. She smiles her country club smile. She says, "Honey, it is just a formality for the family accounts." My pulse does not spike. My hands do not shake. She has no idea I already know exactly what she stole. Before I take you into that private dining room, take a second to hit like and subscribe to Pan of Vengeance. Tell me your age and what city you are listening from in the comments. I read every single one. Let me take you back 28 days. The afternoon the illusion of my family shattered. It was a Tuesday. The rain was coming down in steady gray sheets against the windshield of my old sedan. I pulled into my parents' suburban Ohio driveway. They were in Napa Valley for 2 weeks. They left me with the chores they always assigned the reliable daughter. Check the mail, water the ferns, make sure the house looks lived in. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The air hung thick with the scent of Evelyn's preferred vanilla fig candles. They cost $80 apiece. She burned them daily. A baseline luxury I assumed my father Richard paid for with his corporate salary. I dropped my wet umbrella by the door and picked up the stack of mail resting on the marble console table. Bills, catalogs, a glossy bridal magazine from my younger sister Harper. Buried near the bottom of the pile was a certified envelope. The return address read, Thomas Sterling Estate Law. It was addressed to me, Journey Scott. Yet it had been directed to my parents' address, a place I had not lived in for 12 years. I ran my thumb over the heavy textured paper. I had not hired a lawyer. I opened it carefully, standing alone in the quiet hallway. The document inside was printed on thick legal stock. I scanned the first paragraph and the breath stalled in my throat. It was a formal inquiry regarding the Harrison Trust. Grandpa Harrison passed away 12 years ago. On the day of his funeral, my parents sat me down in the kitchen. They looked exhausted. They told me he died drowning in medical debts. They claimed they had to liquidate his modest estate just to cover the burial costs and settle accounts with creditors. I was 18. I believed them. According to the letter in my hands, Grandpa Harrison did not die in debt. He died having established a trust solely in my name. The second paragraph requested my immediate response regarding the mandatory 30th birthday principal disbursement. The lawyer noted that his repeated annual correspondence had gone unanswered. The deadline to claim the assets was approaching in exactly 4 weeks. I flipped to page 2. I read the dollar amount listed under the principal balance, $4.2 million. I read it 3 times. The numbers did not change. For 12 years, I had worked double shifts teaching high school history. I skipped vacations. I drove a car with a failing transmission. I believed my family was simply a middle-class household making sacrifices. Meanwhile, my mother burned $80 candles in the foyer. My sister shopped for European honeymoons and planned a 6-figure wedding. They had been feeding off my grandfather's ghost. I did not cry. I did not sweep the crystal vases off the console table. Instead, I laid the letter flat on the marble surface. I took my phone from my coat pocket. I captured clear, high-resolution photos of every single page. Then I folded the document along its original creases. I slipped it back into the certified envelope. I placed it exactly where I had found it, tucked neatly under Harper's bridal catalog. I walked out the front door and locked the deadbolt. The rain soaked my coat as I walked to my car, but I barely felt the cold. The quiet, obedient daughter they had groomed for 3 decades died in that vanilla-scented foyer. I started the engine. I had 28 days to build a trap they would never see coming. The fluorescent lights of room 204 hummed an endless flat note. I sat at my teacher desk grading sophomore history essays the morning after my discovery. My red pen hovered over a paper detailing the Industrial Revolution, but the ink bled into meaningless shapes. My mind remained trapped in my parents' vanilla-scented foyer, staring at a number that defied logic. 4.2 million. When Grandpa Harrison passed away 12 years prior, I had just unpacked my bags in a cramped State College dormitory. Richard and Evelyn drove 3 hours just to deliver the news in person. They sat on the edge of my unmade twin bed, wearing matching expressions of weary grief. Richard rubbed his temples like a man carrying the weight of the world. Evelyn sighed and explained how Grandpa's lingering illness had eaten through his modest savings. They spun a tragic, detailed tale of second mortgages and relentless creditors circling the estate. They told me they were stepping in to cover the funeral costs out of the goodness of their hearts, saving our family from public embarrassment. I wept for my grandfather that day. I also felt a profound, burdensome gratitude for my parents. I spent the next decade paying my own way through life just to spare them any further financial strain. I took out $40,000 in student loans. I worked double shifts at a diner smelling of old grease and burnt coffee until 2 a.m. I missed study groups and weekend trips because I was terrified of asking my supposedly struggling parents for a single dime. Meanwhile, Harper experienced a distinctly different reality. My younger sister was the golden child, the recipient of European backpacking tours and brand new sedans tied with giant red ribbons. Now she was planning a wedding estimated at 6 figures. My phone buzzed against the faux wood grain of my desk, pulling me back to the present. A group text notification from Harper to her 6 bridesmaids flashed on the screen. I opened it while unwrapping the aluminum foil from my packed lunch. A dry turkey sandwich on wheat bread. Harper had sent a barrage of messages. "Girls, we need to talk about the alterations for the reception dresses. The seamstress is charging an extra $100 per gown. Please Venmo me by Friday. I know money is tight for some of you, but we have to maintain the aesthetic for the photographer. Do not ruin this for me." Right below the demanding text was a link to her Instagram story. I clicked the screen. The video showed Harper twirling in an exclusive bridal boutique surrounded by layers of tulle and imported lace. She held a crystal flute of rose champagne, laughing at the camera. Evelyn sat in the background, smiling serenely and resting a designer handbag on her lap. The caption read simply, "Cheers to the perfect day, funded by the best parents in the world." I stared at my cheap sandwich. A sickening, metallic taste coated the back of my tongue. The contrast hit me with visceral force. Harper's curated upper-middle-class illusion was not funded by Richard and Evelyn. It was funded by me. The champagne, the dresses, the European vacations. Every single luxury they paraded in front of our community was paid for with my stolen inheritance. Harper was complaining about alteration fees while standing in a boutique subsidized by my grandfather's ghost. I stood up and walked to the classroom door. I checked the hallway. Empty. I locked the heavy wooden door and pulled the window shade down, blocking out the corridor. I walked back to my desk and picked up my phone. My hands felt cold but remarkably steady. The shock had burned off, leaving behind a stark, calculated clarity. I pulled up the photo of the certified letter I had taken the day before. I dialed the phone number listed under the letterhead for Thomas Sterling Estate Law. The line rang twice before a receptionist answered. I gave my name and requested to speak with Mr. Sterling regarding the Harrison Trust. A brief hold followed. The silence stretched the tension tight across my chest. Then a voice came on the line. Calm, unflappable, precise. "Miss Scott, I have been attempting to reach you for a very long time." I kept my voice low. "Mr. Sterling, I only received your correspondence yesterday. My parents intercepted the previous notices." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. A lawyer trained to remain neutral had just reacted to a raw truth. Sterling asked me a series of security questions. My grandfather's date of birth, my social security number, the maiden name of my paternal grandmother. I answered each one without hesitation, staring at the map of the world taped to my classroom wall. Sterling exhaled a long breath. Miss Scott, we need to arrange an in-person meeting immediately. I am looking at the ledger for the trust. For the past 12 years, your parents have utilized a legal provision as your designated trustees. The stipulations prohibited them from touching the core principal until your 30th birthday. However, they were granted discretionary access to the accrued interest. This provision assumed the interest was being used for your housing, health, and education. My education cost me $40,000 in federal loans. I replied. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, stripped of all emotion. Sterling did not miss a beat. Then we have a severe case of fiduciary fraud. They have siphoned the interest dry every single quarter. They submitted annual reports claiming the funds were dispersed for your benefit. I pressed 2 fingers against my forehead. The mechanics of the theft locked into place, forming a perfect, hideous picture. They drained the interest to fund their luxury lifestyle and Harper's golden child existence. But the $4.2 million principal remained locked in a vault they could not crack. Not yet. Sterling continued speaking, his tone shifting into tactical mode. The trust mandates that the principal vests to you entirely on your 30th birthday. That is 28 days from now. Your parents have already submitted preliminary inquiries to my office regarding the transfer protocols. They are trying to position themselves to control the principal once the age restriction lifts. What happens if I confront them right now? I asked. Do not do that, Sterling warned. His voice carried the weight of decades of legal warfare. If you confront them without a legal freeze in place, you give them a runway. Desperate people do irrational things. They could attempt to wire the remaining interest offshore. They could destroy the paper trail. They might even try to coerce you into signing a release under duress. You must act as though nothing has changed. We need time to build an impenetrable wall around your assets. I ended the call and lowered the phone to my desk. The silence of the empty classroom pressed against my ears. I had to maintain the mask of the oblivious, struggling teacher. I had to attend family dinners and listen to Harper complain about expensive floral arrangements. I had to look at Evelyn's serene, smiling face, knowing she had orchestrated a decade of financial starvation while pretending to be my savior. The school bell rang, signaling the end of the lunch period. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside my door. Students would be walking in any second, expecting a lesson on the Cold War. They had no idea their teacher was stepping onto a battlefield of her own. I unlocked the door and greeted the teenagers filing into the room. I smiled. I handed out worksheets. I played the part perfectly. But as I watched the clock tick down the minutes of the period, I knew the hardest performance of my life was waiting for me at the country club bridal shower this weekend. I just needed to smile at the thieves a little longer. The drive into downtown Columbus took 40 minutes. I navigated my sedan through the late afternoon traffic, watching the concrete skyline rise against a pale Ohio sky. The transmission whined as I pulled into an expensive subterranean parking garage. I left my vehicle wedged between a sleek silver sports car and a luxury SUV. The contrast felt fitting. I was stepping out of the meager existence my parents had orchestrated and walking straight into the financial reality they had hidden. The offices of Sterling & Associates occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower. The reception area featured brushed steel and dark leather. A polite assistant offered me sparkling water and escorted me down a quiet, carpeted corridor. She opened a heavy oak door, revealing a corner office overlooking the city. Thomas Sterling sat behind an expansive mahogany desk. He looked exactly as a seasoned estate attorney should. Silver hair neatly parted, a tailored charcoal suit, a calm, measuring gaze that assessed a room before speaking a single word. A green glass banker's lamp cast a focused circle of light over neat stacks of manila folders. "Please sit down, Miss Scott," Sterling gestured to a leather armchair opposite him. He did not offer empty pleasantries or sympathetic smiles. He treated the situation like a surgeon examining a critical wound. I took the seat and rested my hands on my lap. I am here. Tell me how they did it. Sterling reached into the center of his desk and pulled forward a thick forensic file. He untied the string closure and flipped it open. The paper trail inside represented a decade of calculated betrayal. The primary question I had when reviewing your grandfather's trust ledger was how your parents bypassed the mandatory beneficiary notifications. Sterling began. The trust structure required your signature for any disbursement of interest once you reached the age of majority. Yet the bank released funds to Richard and Evelyn every quarter without raising a single red flag. He slid a glossy photocopy across the polished wood. It was a bank application form dated exactly 1 week after my 18th birthday. I leaned forward. My name was printed at the top, Journey Scott. Below it, the form established a joint checking account with Evelyn Scott listed as the secondary account holder. Sterling pointed to a box near the bottom corner. They utilized a standard banking maneuver. By opening a joint account in your name while you were still financially dependent, they created a legal receptacle. The trust officers verified the account belonged to you and began wiring the accrued interest directly into it. Once the funds landed, your mother simply transferred the money outward into their private domestic accounts. A memory surfaced, slicing through the fog of the past 12 years. My 18th birthday. Evelyn taking me out for celebratory coffee. She drove me to her preferred bank branch afterward, claiming we needed to build my credit history for adulthood. She handed me a stack of papers, told me where to sign, and bought me a pastry when we finished. I thought she was teaching me responsibility. She was actually building the pipeline to siphon my inheritance. What about the tax documents? I asked. My throat felt dry. The IRS requires reporting on trust income. Sterling turned another page in the file. He produced a change of address form. They routed all financial correspondence regarding this specific account to a private post office box in a neighboring zip code. They intercepted the 1099 forms, filed the taxes on your behalf using a family accountant, and paid the liabilities using the stolen interest. You never saw the paperwork because the paperwork never went to your residence. It was a textbook case of identity theft, executed by the people who raised you. I stared at the documents. The sheer premeditation required to orchestrate this scheme defied belief. This was not a moment of weakness or a crime of opportunity. Richard and Evelyn sat at their kitchen table year after year, actively managing a shadow life in my name. That brings us to the immediate threat, Sterling said. His voice dropped an octave, anchoring my attention. He produced a second folder. This one contained fresh documents printed on bright white paper. The interest payments dried up recently because the trust principal is preparing to vest. $4.2 million. As you know, the terms dictate the full balance transfers to your sole control on your 30th birthday. Sterling slid a new document toward the green light of his lamp. However, my office received this package via certified courier 2 days ago. I read the bold heading, Durable Power of Attorney. Below that lay a secondary document establishing a corporate entity, the Richard Scott Family Holdings Limited Liability Company. Sterling tapped his index finger against the LLC agreement. Your parents recognize their access to the interest is ending. They are attempting a final, permanent heist. They submitted this durable power of attorney claiming you have authorized Richard to act as your primary financial agent. The accompanying instructions dictate that the moment the $4.2 million principal vests, it should be immediately transferred into this new corporate LLC. I studied the structure of the LLC on the page. Richard was listed as the managing director, holding exclusive control over all asset liquidation. If this transfer succeeded, the money would disappear behind a corporate wall. I would be locked out of my own grandfather's legacy forever. I looked closer at the durable power of attorney. My eyes fell on the signature line at the bottom of the page. Journey Scott. The handwriting was a flawless imitation of my signature, but it was the ink that made my stomach turn. The signature was executed in a distinct shade of bright teal blue. A stark, vivid image flashed in my mind. Evelyn, sitting at the kitchen island writing thank you notes on expensive stationery. She owned a custom-engraved fountain pen that she guarded fiercely. She refused to write in standard black or navy. She insisted that teal blue was her signature color, a mark of her unique, refined taste. She forged my signature, I said. The words tasted like ash, and she did not even bother to switch pens. Sterling observed my reaction. The arrogance of the amateur criminal, he noted quietly. They have operated in the dark for so long, they believe they are untouchable. Can we reject the transfer right now? I asked. Can we freeze everything today? Sterling shook his head. If I reject the power of attorney today, I have to provide a legal justification. Your parents will immediately realize you have discovered the deception. They possess the joint account routing numbers and intimate knowledge of your personal data. They could attempt to secure predatory loans against the incoming trust or initiate aggressive wire transfers of the remaining residual interest to offshore accounts. We must lock them out entirely. He leaned back in his leather chair, folding his hands together. I need exactly 28 days to draft a fortified corporate trust in your name. We will build an impenetrable vault. Once it is finalized, we will file a devastating asset freeze injunction that will trigger automatically at midnight on your birthday. It will paralyze Richard and Evelyn's accounts instantly. 28 days, I repeated. The number sounded like a life sentence. Sterling held my gaze. You must return to your life, Miss Scott. You must answer their phone calls. You must attend their dinners. You must play the role of the oblivious, struggling daughter without showing a single crack in your armor. If you confront them or alter your behavior before the injunction is filed, you risk losing the principal. Surviving a month of psychological warfare requires a flawless performance. Can you do it? I looked down at the teal-blue forgery. Evelyn thought I was a puppet. Richard thought I was a fool. They expected me to remain the quiet, agreeable girl who ate cheap turkey sandwiches while they drank imported wine. I can do it, I told the lawyer. My voice carried no hesitation. Sterling closed the forensic file. Then the trap is set. Do not contact me from your personal devices. Use a secure line. We will speak next week. I left the glass tower and descended into the subterranean garage. The drive back to the suburbs felt entirely different from the journey inward. I was no longer a victim processing a shock. I was a quiet operative holding the blueprint to my own liberation. I parked my sedan outside my apartment building and checked my phone. A text message from Evelyn waited on the screen. It was a reminder about Harper's bridal shower scheduled for this coming Saturday at the Oakmont Country Club. Do not be late, Journey. Wear the floral dress. We need family photos before the guests arrive. I locked my car doors and walked toward my building. The real test was only 4 days away. I had to walk into a room filled with their wealthy friends, smile for the cameras, and pretend I did not know they were stealing my future to pay for the cocktail hour. The battlefield was set, and the enemy was wearing pearls. The Oakmont Country Club smelled of fresh-cut Bermuda grass and old money. Valets in crisp white shirts navigated imported sedans around a circular driveway paved with imported stone. Inside the Magnolia Room, Harper's bridal shower was in full swing. Giant floral arrangements of white hydrangeas and pale pink peonies dominated every table. A string quartet played a classical arrangement in the corner, barely audible over the hum of 50 wealthy guests. It was a masterclass in upper-class performance, and every single petal was funded by the Harrison Trust. I walked through the double doors wearing the requested pastel floral dress. I carried a modest gift purchased on a public school teacher's budget, a ceramic baking dish that felt embarrassingly heavy and cheap against the backdrop of luxury. Harper held court near a custom mimosa bar. She wore a designer silk jumpsuit, laughing loudly at a joke told by one of Evelyn's tennis partners. My sister thrived in the center of attention. She had been raised to believe the world was a stage built specifically for her debut. Evelyn moved through the crowd with practiced predatory grace. She wore a tailored ivory suit, accepting compliments from the guests with a practiced, exhausted sigh. She told a woman dripping in diamonds that weddings were simply a drain on the spirit, but a mother always sacrifices for her girls to have the perfect day. The hypocrisy tasted like bile in the back of my throat. My mother was playing the role of the selfless matriarch, bleeding herself dry, while secretly orchestrating the theft of my grandfather's legacy to pay the catering bill. I retreated to the perimeter of the room. I arranged my ceramic dish on a gift table already overflowing with silver-wrapped boxes from high-end boutiques. I wanted to blend into the flocked wallpaper, counting the minutes until I could escape back to the safety of my quiet apartment. The air shifted. The faint, familiar scent of vanilla and fig cut through the heavy floral perfume of the room. Evelyn appeared beside me. Her smile remained fixed in place for the benefit of the room, but her eyes held the cold, calculating focus of a predator measuring the distance to its prey. She did not offer a greeting. She did not ask how my drive was. Instead, she reached into the oversized designer tote resting on her arm and withdrew a cream-colored folder. She set it flat on the linen tablecloth right between a towering stack of gifts and a crystal vase. "Journey," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I need you to take care of a quick signature for your father." She unclipped the folder. Inside sat a pristine, multi-page legal document. "It is just some routine family tax accounting for Harper's wedding vendors," Evelyn explained smoothly. "The accountant needs it squared away before the end of the fiscal quarter. Just a formality." She reached back into her tote and produced her custom fountain pen, the teal ink, the exact instrument used to forge my signature on 12 years of fraudulent disbursements. She held it out to me. The metal casing caught the light from the chandeliers above, gleaming like a blade. I looked down at the document. The top page featured dense, standard boilerplate language, but my eyes caught a specific phrase printed near the left margin: Limited Liability Transfer Authorization. This was not a tax form for caterers. This was the LLC agreement Thomas Sterling had warned me about. If I took that teal pen and signed my name on the dotted line, the trap would snap shut. The $4.2 million principal would be legally bound to Richard's new corporate entity. I would be authorizing the permanent transfer of my own future. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to remain shallow and even. I could not let her see my pulse jumping at my throat. From across the room, the melodic, bright clinking of crystal champagne flutes drifted over the conversation. Harper raised her glass in a toast, the picture of radiant, oblivious joy. The delicate sound of celebration formed a jarring, surreal contrast to the suffocating tension radiating from the woman standing beside me. Evelyn pushed the pen an inch closer to my hand. "Just sign at the bottom tabs, honey. Richard is waiting on this so he can wire the florist." I needed an exit. A direct refusal would trigger a confrontation, violating Sterling's explicit instructions to maintain my docile facade. I blinked, softening my expression into an empty, agreeable mask. I patted the small clutch purse hanging from my shoulder, feigning clumsy forgetfulness. "Oh, Mom, I am so sorry. I left my reading glasses in the glove compartment of my car." Evelyn's smile tightened. The corners of her mouth twitched. "You do not need glasses to sign your name, Journey." "I know," I replied, keeping my tone light and entirely apologetic. "But you know how I get about legal jargon. The principal at school always reprimands me for signing student education plans without reading the fine print first. Let me run out and grab my glasses. I want to look it over, just so I know what family accounts we are talking about." I took a half step backward, distancing myself from the gift table and the teal pen. "I will be right back." Evelyn stared at me. Her eyes narrowed into thin, dangerous slits. She sensed it, a microscopic deviation in my usual compliant routine. The old Journey would have signed the paper without a second thought, eager to please, desperate to be helpful. This new hesitation was a glitch in her perfectly programmed machine. She wanted to snap at me. I could see the muscles in her jaw flexing as she suppressed the urge to command me to pick up the pen. But we were standing in the middle of the Magnolia Room. 2 tables away, the country club president's wife was watching us with polite curiosity. Evelyn was trapped by her own social arena. She could not cause a scene. She could not drop the mask of the loving, patient mother in front of the exact people she was trying to impress. "Fine." Evelyn clipped her voice, barely a breath. "Go get your glasses. Do not Dawdle. The photographer wants group shots in 10 minutes. She snapped the folder shut and slid it back into her designer tote. I turned my back on her and walked toward the exit. I kept my pace steady, resisting the overwhelming urge to break into a sprint. I pushed through the heavy oak doors of the Magnolia Room and stepped into the quiet, carpeted corridor leading to the lobby. The conditioned air hit my flushed skin, cooling the sweat forming at my hairline. I had survived the ambush. I had protected the principal for one more day. I exhaled a long, shaky breath and reached into my clutch to retrieve my car keys, planning to hide in my sedan for 20 minutes to compose myself. Before my fingers found the metal ring, my cell phone vibrated sharply against my palm. I pulled the device out and looked at the illuminated screen. It was an incoming call from an unknown local number. I answered it, expecting Sterling, or his paralegal, checking in on my status. Instead, the voice on the other end belonged to a complete stranger. The words they spoke plunged my fragile, carefully constructed plan into immediate jeopardy, proving that my parents were moving much faster than Sterling had anticipated. The voice on the other end of the line did not belong to Thomas Sterling. It belonged to a stranger reading from a computer screen. "Hello, is this Journey Scott?" I stood in the carpeted hallway of the Oakmont Country Club, gripping my phone. The muffled sounds of the string quartet drifted through the heavy oak doors behind me. "Yes, this is Journey. This is Marissa calling from the First Ohio branch downtown." The woman spoke with the practiced, measured tone of financial customer service. "I am contacting you regarding the joint checking profile ending in 472. My breath caught. Sterling had warned me he would be updating the contact information on the hidden accounts. He formally attached my cellular number to the primary contact file just 24 hours ago, replacing my mother's private post office box details. Evelyn still believed she controlled the sole communication channel. She was wrong. "How can I help you, Marissa?" I kept my tone polite and entirely neutral. "We received an online request to wire $50,000 to an external vendor early this afternoon." The teller explained, "However, our fraud prevention algorithm flagged the transaction due to the unusually high volume. We placed a temporary hold on the transfer. We need your verbal authorization to release the funds." $50,000. The catering invoice for Harper's Country Club wedding reception was due by the end of the month. Evelyn was trying to pull a substantial lump sum out of the accessible interest before my 30th birthday triggered the automatic principal lock. She was draining the reservoir dry. I looked down at the geometric pattern woven into the hallway carpet. If I allowed that wire to process $50,000 of my grandfather's legacy, would disappear into the pockets of a luxury catering company. "Do not release those funds, Marissa," I said. My voice carried a cool, steady authority I did not know I possessed. "Keep the security freeze active on the entire profile. I suspect fraudulent activity. I need to review the ledger in person before authorizing any outbound wires." The teller agreed immediately, noting the fraud alert in her system. I ended the call and slipped the device back into my small clutch purse. I had just choked off my parents' supply of stolen cash. The fallout would be swift. I pushed open the doors and stepped back into the Magnolia Room. The scent of expensive floral arrangements felt cloying now. I navigated around groups of laughing guests until I found Evelyn standing near the gift table. She looked expectantly at my empty hands. "I am so sorry, Mom." I offered a sheepish, apologetic smile. I could not find my reading glasses in the glove compartment. I must have left them on my kitchen counter at home. I will have to look over that tax paper later tonight. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. A flash of genuine irritation crossed her features, but the photographer called for family portraits before she could formulate a reprimand. I stood shoulder to shoulder with the woman whose shadow financial empire I had just paralyzed. We smiled for the flashing cameras. I played the part of the devoted sister while internally counting down the hours until the bank opened on Monday morning. Sunday passed in agonizing silence. Financial institutions remained closed on the weekends, meaning Evelyn could not discover the frozen wire transfer until the next business cycle. I spent the day in my quiet apartment, grading essays and preparing lesson plans. I felt like a soldier sitting in a trench waiting for the sun to rise. Monday morning arrived with a biting autumn chill. I stood at the front of my classroom writing historical dates across the whiteboard. My phone rested on the wooden desk near my lesson planner. During second period, the device vibrated. The screen illuminated, displaying a text message from Evelyn. "Call me, now." I erased a smudge on the whiteboard and continued my lecture on the industrial era. 10 minutes later, the phone buzzed a second time. "Bank error. Need to speak with you immediately." By the time the lunch bell rang, my notification screen was crowded with her escalating panic. "Where are you? Answer your phone, Journey. This is an emergency. Call me back." The frantic tone of her messages was palpable. The flawless illusion of the wealthy matriarch was cracking under the immediate pressure of unpaid vendor invoices. I ignored every single text. I ate my lunch in silence. I taught my afternoon classes. I let her stew in her own rising desperation. The final bell echoed through the school corridors at 3 o'clock. I packed my canvas tote bag and walked out the side exit toward the faculty parking lot. The Ohio sky hung heavy with thick gray clouds threatening rain. Evelyn was standing next to the driver's side door of my 10-year-old sedan. She wore a dark, tailored trench coat over her expensive tennis clothes. The serene, poised smile she wore at the country club was entirely gone. Her posture was rigid. Her face was tight-drawn and pale. She looked like a woman standing on the deck of a sinking ship. She marched toward me before I even reached the edge of the asphalt. "Did you call First Ohio?" She skipped the maternal greetings. She skipped the subtle manipulation. She went straight for the interrogation. I stopped walking. I looked at her, taking in the sight of my mother unraveling. I channeled every ounce of Thomas Sterling's calm, legal detachment. I adjusted the strap of my canvas tote on my shoulder. "What are you talking about?" "The bank," she snapped. Her voice was too loud for a school parking lot carrying over the roofs of the parked cars. "First Ohio. Did someone from that downtown branch call your cell phone today? Did you tell them to freeze a wire transfer?" This was the trap. Evelyn had spent 12 years looking me in the eyes and promising that Grandpa Harrison died broke. She had spent a decade hiding the joint checking account she opened using my stolen identity. She could not accuse me of freezing the trust money without admitting the trust money existed. I tilted my head, allowing a look of genuine mild confusion to wash over my features. I furrowed my brow. "Why would a bank call me about your money?" I asked. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. Her lips parted, but the words failed to materialize. I pushed one step closer, closing the physical distance between us. I delivered the final strike with a soft, innocent curiosity. "Why would my name be on your bank account, Mom?" The question hung in the damp, cold air. It was a flawless, logical checkmate. Evelyn's eyes darted back and forth, searching my face for any hint of mockery or deceit. She found nothing but blank, compliant confusion. The remaining color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a sickly, ashen hue. She was locked inside the cage of her own elaborate lie. To demand I unfreeze the funds, she would have to confess to identity theft right here on the pavement. To maintain her lifelong deception, she had to walk away from $50,000. She stammered. A disjointed syllable escaped her throat. She gripped the leather handle of her designer purse so hard, her knuckles turned stark white. It must be a clerical mistake. She whispered finally. Her voice shook, lacking all its usual commanding authority. "They must have crossed some internal wires. I will handle it." She turned on her heel and walked rapidly toward her luxury SUV, parked illegally in the fire lane. I watched her climb into the driver's seat and speed away, tires squealing against the damp asphalt. She was retreating, but she was far from defeated. They knew the walls were closing in on their perfect life. They felt the pressure building around their stolen finances. They just did not realize I was the architect of their ruin. But choking off a money supply is a dangerous tactical maneuver. Desperate people do not simply give up and accept defeat when the well runs dry. They look for other, darker ways to survive. What happens when a family built on stolen wealth runs out of time and legitimate options? I was about to find out exactly who Richard owed money to and why he was willing to risk federal prison to get his hands on my inheritance. Exactly 7 days remained until the end of the month. My 30th birthday hovered on the calendar like a distant storm front, finally making landfall. I sat at my small kitchen table grading history quizzes when my cell phone vibrated against the cheap laminate surface. The caller identification displayed Thomas Sterling's private office line. He never contacted me outside of our scheduled strategy sessions. I answered the call. "Miss Scott." Sterling's voice lacked its usual smooth, professional cadence. It sounded rigid, urgent. "Can you come to my office this afternoon?" It was not a question. It was a directive. I drove downtown under a heavy, overcast Ohio sky. The glass tower housing Sterling's firm felt noticeably colder today. The polite receptionist did not offer me sparkling water or pleasantries. She simply gestured toward the heavy oak door leading to the corner suite. I stepped inside. Sterling was not sitting behind his expansive mahogany desk. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at the crawling city traffic. A single gray folder rested on his blotter, replacing the thick forensic files from our previous meetings. "Please take a seat, Journey." He turned around, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. "I took the liberty of retaining a private investigator last week. I needed to trace the outbound cash flow from your mother's joint checking account to understand their long-term financial strategy. We assumed your parents were simply funding a luxury lifestyle. We were wrong." I sat in the leather armchair. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. What did the investigator find? Sterling opened the gray folder. He did not pull out bank ledgers or forged tax documents. 10 years ago, your father experienced a sudden career shift. Do you recall that period? A memory surfaced from my sophomore year of college. Richard had been a senior logistics executive at a regional shipping firm. One Tuesday, he abruptly announced his early retirement to start an independent consulting business from a home office. Evelyn hosted a lavish, catered brunch to celebrate his entrepreneurial spirit. They bought a new boat a month later. I told Sterling the details. "That brunch was a cover-up," Sterling stated flatly. Richard did not retire. He was caught embezzling corporate funds. I gripped the armrests of my chair. My father, a man who lectured me incessantly about the value of a hard-earned dollar, was a corporate thief. "The logistics firm wanted to avoid a public relations scandal," Sterling continued. "They offered your father a quiet restitution agreement. He avoided a federal indictment and a lengthy prison sentence by agreeing to pay back the stolen capital with severe interest penalties over a 10-year schedule." The timeline clicked into place with horrifying precision. He needed a massive, untraceable revenue stream to make those monthly restitution payments while simultaneously maintaining Evelyn's country club facade. He used the trust interest. I whispered. The realization settled into my bones like lead. He stole my grandfather's legacy to pay back the money he stole from his employer. Sterling nodded slowly. Exactly. The stolen interest kept Richard out of a federal penitentiary. However, he finished paying off that specific restitution obligation 18 months ago. The problem is, your parents had grown accustomed to living on a fraudulent double income. When Harper began planning a 6-figure wedding, they refused to downsize their aesthetic. They continued spending money they did not rightfully own. Sterling reached into the gray folder. When you instructed the bank teller to freeze the $50,000 wire transfer earlier this week, you did not just bounce a check to a wedding caterer. You cut off your father's survival line. He slid a glossy 8x10 photograph across the polished wood of the desk. I leaned forward. It was a grainy surveillance image taken at night. The setting appeared to be a diner parking lot on the industrial outskirts of the city. A neon sign reflected across the wet asphalt. Richard stood near the rear bumper of his luxury SUV. He was speaking to a man wearing a cheap, dark jacket. The stranger leaned casually against the vehicle, projecting an aura of casual menace. But my focus remained entirely on my father. Richard's posture was unrecognizable. The confident, arrogant patriarch who commanded Sunday dinners was gone. His shoulders hunched forward in a submissive, terrified cringe. The harsh parking lot light illuminated his face. His skin was pale, shining with a heavy layer of nervous sweat. He looked like a cornered animal begging a predator for a few more moments of life. When the trust interest proved insufficient to cover their mounting debts, Richard turned to unregulated capital. Sterling explained, his voice dropping to a grim whisper. He borrowed heavily from high-interest, predatory lenders, loan sharks. That $50,000 wire transfer was not for floral arrangements. It was an overdue installment for the syndicate. I stared at the photograph. The beads of sweat on my father's forehead told a story of profound existential dread. The LLC transfer agreement they want you to sign is not a retirement plan. Sterling tapped a finger against the desk. It is a ransom payment. Richard owes a balloon payment to these lenders. If the $4.2 million principal does not vest into his corporate account next week, he loses everything. His home, his freedom, potentially his life. The stakes shifted in the span of a single heartbeat. I was no longer an aggrieved daughter fighting for financial independence. I was the final remaining barrier between a desperate criminal and his violent creditors. Sterling closed the gray folder. I need you to understand the gravity of your situation, Miss Scott. Your parents are not just greedy. They are existentially panicked. A father trapped by his own disastrous choices will not hesitate to sacrifice his child to save himself. You must upgrade the locks on your apartment door tonight. Do not meet them in private, isolated spaces. Remain in public view at all times. A cold shiver raced down my spine. The psychological warfare I had been navigating for the past 3 weeks suddenly morphed into a tangible, physical threat. Evelyn confronting me in the school parking lot was just the beginning. They needed my signature on that LLC document to survive, and they were running out of time to secure it. I will be careful. I told the lawyer, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline flooding my system. The automatic injunction is still scheduled to trigger at midnight on my birthday. Yes, Sterling affirmed, the legal vault is built. We just have to keep you safe until the clock runs out. I left the glass tower and stepped out onto the bustling city sidewalk. The cold air rushed against my face, clearing the lingering scent of Sterling's polished office. I unlocked my sedan and climbed into the driver's seat, feeling a new hyper-awareness of my surroundings. I checked my rearview mirror twice before turning the ignition key. As I pulled out of the parking garage, my cell phone illuminated the dark interior of the car. A string of incoming messages flooded the screen. They were not from Evelyn or Richard. They were from Harper. The financial freeze I initiated on Monday was finally causing a catastrophic domino effect in their daily lives. The fake wedding aesthetic was crumbling in real time. "Journey, you need to get to the bridal boutique right now," Harper's text read. The digital words radiated frantic, entitled rage. "The vendor checks bounced. The manager is threatening to cancel my custom reception dresses. Bring your checkbook. This is an emergency." I put the vehicle in drive and merged into the evening traffic. My father was sweating in diner parking lots dealing with loan sharks, while my sister was weeping over imported lace. The house of cards was collapsing, and they expected me to hold up the pillars with a teacher's salary. I steered my car toward the upscale retail district. It was time to watch the golden child discover the limits of her illusion. The upscale retail district of downtown Columbus offered a stark contrast to the gritty industrial parking lot where my father had been sweating just 24 hours earlier. I navigated my aging sedan past rows of luxury storefronts and parked near a bridal boutique named Laurel and Lace. The exterior featured towering glass windows, showcasing mannequins draped in imported silk. It was the kind of establishment that served champagne on silver trays while clients browsed. Today, however, the atmosphere inside was far from celebratory. I pushed open the heavy glass door. The scent of fresh lilies and expensive fabric filled the showroom, but the underlying current in the room was pure, unadulterated panic. Harper stood on a circular velvet pedestal in the center of the main viewing area. She wore a secondary reception dress, heavily embroidered with pearls and crystalline beads. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She was weeping with a loud, theatrical intensity that echoed off the mirrored walls. Standing opposite her was the boutique manager. The woman wore a tailored black suit and maintained a rigid professional posture, but her expression conveyed deep impatience. She held a small stack of printed receipts in her manicured hand. "I cannot authorize the final alterations or release the garments, Miss Scott." The manager spoke with a clipped, icy tone. "The initial drafts from your mother's accounts were returned by the bank this morning. The floral vendor just called our coordinating office to report the same issue. Until the balance is cleared in full, we are pausing all services." Harper let out a high-pitched sob. "You are ruining my wedding. You cannot do this to me." My sister had never held a paying job in her entire life. During our teenage years, while I worked late shifts at a local diner, Harper spent her summers lounging at the country club pool, complaining about the humidity. She possessed zero concept of financial mechanics. She believed money was an invisible force that simply materialized whenever she desired something beautiful. She spotted me standing near the entrance. Her tear-streaked face immediately contorted into a mask of entitled fury. She stepped off the velvet pedestal and marched toward me, the heavy beaded fabric of her dress pooling around her ankles. "Journey, you have to fix this right now," Harper demanded, her voice cracking. "The checks bounced. Mom says the bank is doing an audit and their funds are tied up. The manager wants $10,000 today, or she is canceling my fitting." I looked at my sister. The audacity of her request hung in the quiet retail space. She knew I was a public school history teacher. She knew my monthly salary barely covered rent and groceries. Yet she expected me to magically produce $10,000 to rescue her luxury aesthetic. "I need you to write a check," Harper insisted, reaching out to grab my forearm. "Just put it on your credit cards. You never buy anything anyway." "You have to save my special day." I glanced down at her arm. A thick ivory tag dangled from the sheer lace sleeve of the gown she was wearing. The printed numbers were crisp and undeniable. $8,000. My sister was throwing a hysterical public tantrum about being destitute while wearing a dress that cost more than my entire vehicle. She was begging a teacher to subsidize a party funded by stolen wealth. The sheer delusional reality of my family was laid bare in that single visual detail. Before I could formulate a response, Evelyn appeared from a back office corridor. She moved with a fast, jerky momentum that lacked all her usual grace. She saw the boutique manager watching the spectacle with undisguised disdain. Evelyn's social reputation was her most prized possession, and it was currently bleeding out on the showroom floor. She grabbed my elbow. Her fingers dug into my skin like steel clamps. "We need to speak in private," Evelyn hissed. She did not wait for my consent. She pulled me hard, dragging me away from Harper and the staring manager. We stepped into an empty fitting room in the back corner of the store. The space was small, lined with mirrors that reflected my mother's unraveling composure from a dozen different angles. Evelyn dropped the loving matriarch act the moment the heavy curtain swung shut behind us. The serene smile she wore at the bridal shower was gone. Her face was tight, the muscles in her neck straining against her skin. Her eyes burned with a dark, venomous intensity I had never seen directed at me before. "You think you are being clever," she whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You think playing games with your father is a joke." I maintained my neutral expression. I kept my breathing slow and deliberate. "I do not know what you are talking about, Mom. Stop lying to my face." Evelyn took a step closer, backing me against the mirrored wall. "The bank told Richard an authorized user requested a security hold on the outgoing wires. You are the only other person on that profile. You are suffocating this family." She was confirming her own crime. She was openly admitting that my name was on the account holding their stolen revenue. She was too desperate to maintain the 12-year fiction any longer. She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out the cream-colored folder from the country club. She shoved it hard against my chest, forcing me to take it. "You are going to sign those limited liability forms right now," Evelyn commanded. "You are going to sign them, and you are going to call First Ohio and release the security freeze. If you do not execute this by Friday, you are done." She pointed a manicured finger inches from my nose. "You will not attend this wedding. You will be permanently banned from our home. We will cut you out of our lives so completely you will forget you ever had a family. Do you understand me, Journey? Do as you are told, or you are nothing to us." This was the ultimate threat of a toxic parent, the promise of exile. For 3 decades, I had lived in silent terror of disappointing them. I had swallowed my own needs and folded myself into small, invisible shapes just to maintain my place at their dinner table. Evelyn believed the threat of abandonment would shatter my resistance. She thought I was still the frightened 18-year-old girl mourning her grandfather. She was wrong. The investigator's photograph of Richard sweating in that diner parking lot was burned into my memory. They were not threatening me from a position of strength. They were trying to extort me to save themselves from a criminal syndicate. I held the cream-colored folder in my hands. The paper felt remarkably light. I did not flinch. I did not tremble. I looked directly into my mother's dark, desperate eyes. "I cannot sign away money that you told me does not exist." The sentence left my lips with cool, devastating precision. It was a direct, undeniable hit, the ultimate logical checkmate. Evelyn's face froze. The venom in her eyes evaporated, replaced by a sudden, hollow shock. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. She watched my steady gaze, and the terrifying realization finally broke through her arrogance. I was not confused. I was not playing a petty game. I knew everything. I knew about the trust. I knew about the identity theft. I knew about the $4.2 million. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a sickly gray. Her hands dropped to her sides, falling limp against her expensive trench coat. The 12-year Cold War was officially over. Open hostilities had begun, and she had just handed me the Declaration of Surrender. I placed the cream-colored folder on a small velvet stool next to the mirror. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of anger or vindication. The silence was far more punishing than any scream could ever be. I turned my back on the woman who had stolen a decade of my life. I pushed the heavy curtain aside and walked out of the fitting room. I crossed the showroom floor, ignoring Harper's tearful demands and the boutique manager's bewildered stare. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped out onto the damp Columbus sidewalk. The cool evening air hit my face, carrying the scent of impending rain. I took a deep, cleansing breath, feeling the heavy, invisible chains of my childhood falling away from my shoulders. I began walking toward my parked sedan, ready to drive home and lock my doors until my 30th birthday. But my path was suddenly blocked. A figure stepped out from the shadows between a brick storefront and a row of decorative street lamps. He wore a tailored suit and possessed a familiar, arrogant smirk. Harper's fiancé, Bryce, was leaning against the hood of my car with his arms crossed over his chest. He had been waiting for me in the dark, and the calculating look in his eyes promised that the battle was far from over. The streetlights flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows across the wet pavement of the retail district. I stopped walking, my pulse kicking an erratic rhythm against my collarbone. Bryce remained leaning casually against the driver's side door of my aging sedan. He adjusted the lapels of his custom suit, a garment that cost roughly the equivalent of my monthly mortgage payment. Harper's fiancé had always cultivated an air of slick, corporate superiority. He worked in commercial real estate, or at least possessed a desk at a firm that dealt in commercial real estate. He drove a European sports car and wore a heavy chronometer watch that he frequently checked during family dinners. My parents adored him. They viewed Bryce as a seamless extension of their own curated aesthetic, a successful, handsome partner to complete Harper's golden child narrative. He uncrossed his arms as I approached. Journey. His voice was smooth, dropping into a low register that suggested false intimacy. Leaving the fitting so soon? Harper texted me that things were getting a little tense inside. I kept my distance, stopping several feet away from the front bumper. Move away from my car, Bryce. I have grading to finish tonight. He did not move. He let out a soft, practiced chuckle. Come on, Journey. There is no need to be defensive. We are all family here, or at least we are about to be. He pushed off the sedan and took a deliberate step toward me. His physical presence was imposing. He was a tall man who used his height to manipulate space, crowding people to establish dominance. He stepped directly into my path, forcing me to either retreat or stand my ground. I locked my knees and held my position on the damp concrete. Richard called me this afternoon. Bryce stated, his tone shifting from faux warmth to a cold, measuring cadence. He told me you are having some confusion regarding the tax restructuring documents. He said you are holding up the vendor payments. I stared at the knot of his silk tie. I am not having any confusion. The documents are fraudulent. Bryce sighed, rubbing the back of his neck like a disappointed older brother dealing with a stubborn child. You really do not understand how wealth management works, do you? Your father is trying to protect the assets. He is trying to build a corporate umbrella to shield the capital from liabilities. If you do not authorize the LLC transfer, you are exposing the entire family to massive tax penalties. He leaned in closer. His cologne smelled sharp and metallic. You need to stop playing these petty games, Journey. Harper is inside crying her eyes out because her floral arrangements are being canceled. You are ruining her wedding over some misplaced sibling rivalry. I looked up, meeting his gaze. A chilling realization snapped into place. Bryce was not acting as a neutral mediator dispatched by a stressed father. His knowledge of the specific legal restructuring was too intimate. His urgency regarding the vendor payments was too personal. A detail from the forensic file Thomas Sterling had shown me suddenly illuminated the dark parking lot. The LLC agreement Evelyn had tried to force upon me at the country club listed Richard as the managing director. But the document contained a secondary rider establishing minor partnership shares. Bryce was listed on those shares. He was not just a bystander protecting his future bride. He was fully complicit in the theft. He had reviewed the fraudulent paperwork. He knew the $4.2 million belonged exclusively to me. He was marrying Harper specifically to gain access to my grandfather's stolen legacy: the European sports car, the custom suits, the lavish lifestyle. Bryce was banking on my signature to fund his own existence. Do what is best for the family. Journey, Bryce commanded, his voice hardening into a direct threat. Sign the papers tonight. If you blow up this wedding, if you humiliate Harper in front of our social circle, I promise you I will make your life incredibly difficult. You teach at a public school in a district where my firm holds significant influence. Do not force me to use it. I glanced past his shoulder. Through the expansive glass windows of the bridal boutique, I could see Harper. An elderly aunt who had just arrived for the fitting was approaching her. Harper's tear-streaked face miraculously transformed. She offered the older woman a bright, sugary smile, pointing to the lace detailing on her gown as if nothing was wrong. The illusion was instantaneous and flawless. Inside the store, my sister was performing the role of the blushing bride. Outside, on the pavement, her fiancé was extorting me in the dark. The entire ecosystem of my family was a predatory organism, feeding off my grandfather's ghost, and they were united in their effort to consume me. Bryce stepped back, expecting me to crumble under the weight of his intimidation. He extended his hand, gesturing toward the door handle of my car. Go home. Call your mother. Tell her you are ready to sign the transfer. I did not offer a rebuttal. Defending myself to a parasite was a waste of breath. I stepped around him, refusing to break eye contact or grant him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. I unlocked the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and engaged the locks with a sharp, metallic click. I started the engine. Bryce watched me through the glass, his arrogant smirk faltering slightly as I put the vehicle in reverse and pulled away from the curb without a single word. I merged onto the dark highway heading toward my apartment. My hands trembled violently against the steering wheel. The adrenaline masking my terror was beginning to fade, leaving behind a cold, suffocating dread. My father was desperate enough to meet with loan sharks. My mother was desperate enough to threaten exile. Now Bryce was leveraging my career to force my compliance. The pressure was mounting from every angle, and the deadline was rapidly approaching. Exactly 2 days remained until the clock struck midnight on my 30th birthday, triggering the irrevocable asset freeze. I arrived at my apartment complex and hurried inside, locking the deadbolt and engaging the security chain. I checked the windows, pulling the blinds tight against the night. I sat on my faded couch, wrapping my arms around my knees, trying to quiet the frantic beating of my heart. The next morning passed in a blur of anxious anticipation. I taught my classes, but my focus constantly drifted to the classroom door, expecting Richard or Evelyn to barge in at any moment. However, the day ended without a single confrontation. By Wednesday afternoon, the atmosphere shifted entirely. The aggressive tactics ceased. The threatening text messages stopped. Instead, my phone vibrated with a completely different kind of communication. Evelyn sent a group message to the extended family thread, including aunts, uncles, and cousins scattered across the state. "We are so thrilled to celebrate our wonderful Journée turning 30 tomorrow," the message read, punctuated with festive emojis. "Richard and I have reserved the private dining room at the Oak Room Steakhouse. We want all of our family there to mark this incredible milestone. 8 o'clock sharp. Drinks are on us." I stared at the illuminated screen. The Oak Room was the most exclusive restaurant in the city. The private dining room required a hefty deposit and a strict dress code. They had pivoted. The threats of exile and career sabotage had failed to break my resistance. Richard and Evelyn realized intimidation was not working, so they changed their strategy. They were retreating to the safety of their social arena. They were organizing a grandiose display of affection, a public celebration designed to trap me. They knew I would not cause a scene in front of my extended family. They intended to use the weight of social pressure, the watchful eyes of 15 relatives, to force my signature on the LLC transfer before midnight. They were setting the stage for a final public ambush, and I had no choice but to walk right into it. The digital clock on my laptop screen displayed 11:58. 2 minutes remained until midnight. 2 minutes until the calendar turned, securing my 30th year of life. I sat at a small, inexpensive desk in the corner of my darkened apartment. The only illumination in the room came from the pale blue glow of the computer monitor reflecting against my face. On the screen, a secure video conference grid displayed 2 faces. Thomas Sterling sat in his home office, wearing a dark cardigan, looking uncharacteristically casual, but retaining his sharp legal focus. In the adjacent grid, a woman named Clara Hayes appeared. She represented the corporate trust division we had retained to manage the incoming funds. The silence in my apartment felt heavy, loaded with the gravity of the impending moment. The refrigerator hummed a low, constant drone in the kitchenette behind me. "We are queued in the system, Miss Scott," Sterling said, his voice transmitting crisply through the computer speakers. The moment the clock strikes 12, the legal age restriction on the Harrison Trust evaporates. The principal becomes unencumbered. I have the new irrevocable trust documents loaded onto the secure portal. Clara is standing by to execute the transfer. I hovered my finger over the trackpad on my laptop. A digital signature field blinked steadily at the bottom of a dense legal contract. This document acts as an immediate sweep. Clara explained, her tone professional and reassuring. Upon your digital signature authorization, $4.2 million will be instantaneously routed from the legacy account into your newly established corporate vault. The asset freeze injunction will file simultaneously with the state courts and the associated banking institutions. Richard and Evelyn Scott will lose all discretionary access, and their fraudulent joint account will be paralyzed. 11:59, 60 seconds. A single minute separated a lifetime of fabricated scarcity from absolute financial liberation. I thought about the decades spent wearing thrift store coats while my mother purchased imported candles. I thought about the crippling student loans I repaid while my sister drove European sports cars. I thought about the elaborate, meticulously crafted lie my parents told me on the day of my grandfather's funeral. The seconds ticked down, counting the final breaths of their shadow empire. Midnight. "Happy birthday, Journey," Sterling said softly. "Execute the document." I pressed my finger against the trackpad. The digital signature populated the empty field. I clicked the green confirmation button at the bottom of the screen. Authorization received, Clara announced a few keystrokes, clicking audibly on her end of the connection. The primary sweep is initiated. The routing protocol is active. A wave of profound exhaustion washed over me. The tension that had kept my spine rigid for 28 days finally began to dissipate. I leaned back in my desk chair, exhaling a long, shaky breath. The money was gone. The $4.2 million was vaulted, secured, behind a fortress of corporate law. Richard and Evelyn could not touch it. Bryce could not leverage it. Harper could not wear it. The battle was over. Before I could vocalize my gratitude, a sudden, deafening sound shattered the quiet of my apartment. A heavy fist slammed against the wooden surface of my front door. The impact resonated through the small living space, rattling the framed pictures hanging on the adjacent wall. "Journey!" a voice roared from the hallway. "Open the door!" It was Richard. My heart seized, stalling in my chest. The residual relief vanished, replaced by a spike of pure, icy terror. I scrambled out of my desk chair, knocking my knee hard against the wooden leg. I dropped to the floor, crawling away from the glow of the laptop monitor toward the narrow entryway. "Journey, I know you are in there," Richard shouted, his voice rough and ragged, lacking any trace of his usual suburban patriarch composure. "Open this goddamn door right now." He pounded again, hitting the wood with a frantic, escalating rhythm. The deadbolt rattled against the metal strike plate. The security chain clinked, a fragile barrier separating me from a desperate man. I pressed my back against the wall next to the door, holding my breath. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket, opening the security application linked to my doorbell camera. The live feed illuminated my screen. The hallway outside was bathed in harsh fluorescent light. Richard stood directly in front of the lens. His appearance was deeply alarming. He wore a rumpled dress shirt half untucked from his trousers. His tie hung loose around his neck. His face was flushed, dark red, contorted with an animalistic panic. He gripped a cell phone in his left hand, the screen glowing bright. He had a contact inside the bank. I realized the truth with a sickening clarity. He possessed a corrupt relationship with a mid-level branch manager, someone who monitored the large accounts. That contact must have received an automated alert the moment Clara initiated the multi-million-dollar transfer sweep. The contact called Richard, warning him that the entire principal was draining out of the legacy account. He knew the money was moving, but he did not know where it was going or who had authorized the transaction. He assumed a clerical error or a delayed bank audit was seizing the funds. He was here to force me to fix it. "Journey, please," Richard's voice cracked, losing its aggressive edge, pivoting into a desperate, wretched plea. "You have to call the bank. Something is wrong with the trust ledger. The accounts are locking up. You have to call them and authorize a halt on the transfers." I sat on the floor, staring at the small screen in my hand. A tiny green light blinked steadily on the doorbell casing, recording his complete psychological unraveling in real time. "Please." He pressed his forehead against the heavy wood of the door. The sound of his ragged breathing filtered through the panels. "I am out of time. They are going to take the house. They are going to take everything. If you do not stop this transfer right now, I am ruined." The image of the loan shark in the diner parking lot flashed through my mind. Richard was not just losing his luxury lifestyle. He was facing immediate, catastrophic retaliation from the syndicate he owed. The balloon payment was due, and the well had just run dry. He waited for a response. The silence in my apartment stretched thick and unbroken. I did not move a single muscle. I did not speak a word. I let the silence punish him. His pleading rapidly curdled back into rage. He slammed both fists against the door, causing the wood to groan under the impact. "You ungrateful little brat," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips onto the camera lens. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You owe us. If you do not fix this tonight, do not bother showing up to dinner tomorrow. You will sign the LLC papers at the restaurant, or you are dead to this family. Do you hear me? You are nothing without us." He struck the door one final time, a punishing blow that echoed down the empty apartment hallway. He stood there for a long moment, his chest heaving, his breath fogging the camera lens. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy and uneven against the carpet. A moment later, my phone vibrated in my palm. A new voicemail notification appeared on the screen. I did not listen to the message. I already knew the contents. He dropped a desperate threat demanding my compliance at the steakhouse dinner. He believed the impending public ambush would break my resolve. He thought he still held the power to force my signature and salvage his shadow empire. He had no idea the money was already gone. He was commanding a ghost to surrender a vault that had already been emptied. I stayed seated on the floor, my back against the wall, until the digital clock on my phone displayed 1 a.m. The adrenaline slowly receded, leaving my limbs feeling heavy and bruised. I stood up, checking the deadbolt one last time before returning to my desk. Sterling and Clara were still connected on the video grid, silently waiting out the storm. "He is gone," I said, my voice raspy. "The transfer is complete, Miss Scott," Clara confirmed, offering a small professional nod. "The funds are secured. The injunctions are filed. You are protected." I closed the laptop, shutting down the connection. I walked into my bedroom and lay down on the mattress, fully clothed. The 30th year of my life had begun with a violent confrontation, but the fear was gone. The trap was fully set. The assets were locked. All that remained was the final performance. Tomorrow evening, I would walk into the private dining room at the Oak Room. I would face 15 extended family members. I would sit across from the man who just tried to batter down my door and the woman who forged my name for a decade. And I would watch their entire world burn to the ground. The Oak Room Steakhouse maintained an atmosphere of hushed, expensive exclusivity. The walls featured dark mahogany paneling adorned with vintage oil paintings of thoroughbred horses. Crystal chandeliers hung low over tables draped in heavy white linen. Waiters moved through the dining room with silent, practiced efficiency, carrying silver trays loaded with prime cuts of beef and imported wine. The private dining suite reserved for my 30th birthday celebration occupied the rear of the restaurant. A long rectangular table dominated the space, surrounded by plush leather chairs. 15 members of my extended family occupied those seats. Aunt Miriam from Chicago, Uncle David and his new wife, a smattering of cousins I only saw during major holidays, and positioned directly across from me, sitting like monarchs surveying their court, were Richard and Evelyn. Harper sat to my left, wearing a cocktail dress that undoubtedly cost 4 figures. Bryce sat beside her, exuding a slick, corporate confidence, checking his heavy chronometer watch every 10 minutes. The dinner proceeded with agonizing slowness. I picked at a roasted filet mignon, forcing myself to chew and swallow while the conversation flowed around me. Relatives asked polite questions about my teaching career. I offered bland, acceptable answers. I played the role of the quiet, unassuming daughter perfectly. No one in the room suspected that the woman smiling politely over a glass of iced tea had completely drained her parents' shadow empire just 18 hours prior. Richard appeared remarkably composed given his violent breakdown outside my apartment door the night before. His suit was immaculately pressed. His tie was perfectly knotted. The panicked, sweating, desperate creature begging through the wood was entirely hidden behind the facade of the successful suburban patriarch. He drank his scotch and laughed at Uncle David's jokes, portraying a man entirely at ease with the world. He believed the late-night bank alert was a temporary systemic error. He believed the money was simply stalled in transit, delayed by a bureaucratic audit. He thought he still possessed the leverage to force my signature and salvage his fraudulent operation. He thought the 15 witnesses surrounding the table would ensure my compliance. The waiters cleared the dinner plates and returned moments later, bearing a massive chocolate cake adorned with sparklers. The family sang a chorus of happy birthday, their voices echoing off the mahogany walls. I blew out the sparklers, plastering a look of profound gratitude across my face. The trap was primed. The audience was captive. The climax of a 12-year deception was about to unfold. Richard stood up from his chair at the head of the table. He picked up his crystal tumbler and tapped the side with his silver dessert spoon. The light ringing sound cut through the low chatter, instantly commanding the attention of the room. "If I could have everyone's attention for a moment," Richard began, his voice projecting a warm, resonant authority. He offered a practiced, benevolent smile, holding his glass up toward the chandelier. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate a truly significant milestone, our wonderful Journey turning 30. He looked directly at me, his eyes conveying a chilling mixture of paternal pride and coercive intent. "Journey, you have always been the quiet anchor of this family. You chose a noble profession. You dedicate your life to educating the next generation. You are responsible, grounded, and mature." Aunt Miriam offered a sentimental sigh, placing a hand over her heart. Harper rolled her eyes subtly, taking a long sip of her wine. "When your grandfather Harrison passed away, he left a void in all our lives." Richard continued, his tone dipping into a register of practiced sorrow. "But looking at you tonight, Journey, I know exactly what he would say. He would say he is incredibly proud of the woman you have become, and so am I. We all are." The hypocrisy of the speech threatened to trigger a physical reaction. The man utilizing my grandfather's name to manipulate my emotions was the exact same man who stole my grandfather's legacy to pay off a loan shark. He was weaponizing the memory of a dead patriarch to execute a final financial heist in front of an audience. To Journey. Richard concluded, raising his glass higher. The room echoed the sentiment, lifting their own drinks in a unified toast. Richard remained standing. He lowered his glass and looked down at his wife. Right on cue, Evelyn reached into her designer handbag resting on an empty chair beside her. She produced the familiar cream-colored folder, the same folder she ambushed me with at the country club. She placed it flat on the pristine white tablecloth directly in front of my dessert plate. She offered a bright maternal smile, projecting an aura of loving organization to the extended family. "Just a quick formality, honey," she coos loudly, ensuring her voice carried down the length of the table. "We need to update some of the family accounts before the end of the month. Just a few signatures and we can get back to celebrating." She reached into her handbag a second time. She withdrew the heavy, polished fountain pen, the teal ink. She placed the pen perfectly parallel to the folder, aligning it with meticulous precision. It sat there gleaming under the light of the chandelier, a simple writing instrument that had served as the weapon of choice for a decade of forgery and identity theft. The 15 relatives seated around the table smiled benignly, assuming they were witnessing a mundane display of parental financial management. They watched me, expecting the quiet, compliant daughter to pick up the pen and sign the paperwork without a second thought. I did not touch the folder. I did not reach for the pen. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly in my lap. I looked around the room, locking eyes briefly with Aunt Miriam, then Uncle David. I glanced at my smug sister and her arrogant fiancé. Finally, I shifted my focus to the head of the table. I looked Richard dead in the eye. The warm, benevolent patriarch mask he wore remained fixed in place, but a tiny muscle near his jaw twitched. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. My voice was low, but it carried a cold, devastating clarity that sliced through the ambient noise of the restaurant. "Is this for the family accounts, Dad?" I asked, maintaining unbroken eye contact. "Or is this for the limited liability company you formed with Bryce to pay off your embezzlement debts?" The sentence landed in the center of the private dining room like a live grenade. The reaction was instantaneous and profound. Aunt Miriam gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Uncle David dropped his fork against his dessert plate with a loud clatter. Bryce froze entirely, the color draining from his face, leaving him looking like a wax mannequin. The room went utterly, terrifyingly silent. The hum of conversation in the main dining area outside the suite suddenly felt miles away. The air inside the room turned brittle, tight with an explosive tension. Evelyn's bright, maternal smile shattered. Her lips parted, but she could not produce a single sound. Her carefully constructed reality was disintegrating in real time, exposing the rotting foundation beneath. Richard stood frozen at the head of the table. The crystal tumbler in his hand shook violently, sloshing amber liquid over the rim. His face transitioned rapidly from flushed confidence to a sickly, pale dread. The panicked, desperate creature from the hallway outside my apartment suddenly breached the surface, visible to every person in the room. He opened his mouth, attempting to salvage the illusion. "Journey, I do not know what you are talking about. You are confused." He was trying to gaslight me in front of an audience. He thought he could still control the narrative. He did not realize I had brought reinforcements to the dinner table. The trap was officially sprung, and it was time to drop the hammer. Evelyn let out a high, brittle sound. It was a laugh entirely devoid of humor, sounding more like a glass shattering against a tile floor. She looked around the long table, her eyes darting frantically from Uncle David to Aunt Miriam. She was desperate to corral the narrative before the truth could take root in the minds of her wealthy relatives. "Oh my goodness," Evelyn trilled, waving a dismissive manicured hand in my direction. "I must apologize to everyone. Journey has been grading midterm examinations all week. You know how underfunded the public education system is. She works such long hours. She is just exhausted and stressed, and her imagination is running wild. Let me just put these documents away for now. We can discuss household bookkeeping another time." She reached across the white tablecloth, intending to snatch the cream-colored folder and hide the evidence inside her designer handbag. I placed my palm flat over the heavy paper, pinning the fraudulent limited liability contract to the table. Our eyes met. The polite country club matriarch vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by a cornered predator. The muscles in her neck pulled taut. She tried to yank the folder free, but I pressed down harder, refusing to yield a single inch. I did not raise my voice. I did not engage in a shouting match. I reached into my small leather clutch. My fingers bypassed my wallet and car keys, finding the cool glass screen of my cell phone. I had dialed the number 3 minutes before Richard began his hypocritical toast. The call was already active, waiting in the dark. I placed the device squarely in the center of the table, resting it next to my half-eaten dessert plate. I pressed the speaker icon. "Miss Scott, are we ready?" The voice resonated through the private dining suite. The acoustic quality of the small microphone was surprisingly clear, bouncing off the dark mahogany paneling and the crystal chandeliers. Aunt Miriam stopped breathing. Uncle David lowered his hands to his lap, his brow furrowing in confusion. Bryce shifted his weight, his leather chair creaking loudly in the sudden, dead silence. "This is Thomas Sterling," the voice announced, carrying the practiced clinical detachment of a veteran litigator. "I am the senior partner at Sterling & Associates Estate Law. I am speaking on behalf of my client, Journey Scott." Evelyn lunged toward the center of the table, her fingers clawing for the phone. "Turn that off," she hissed, her voice dropping into a guttural, ugly register that no one in the extended family had ever heard before. "Turn that off right now, Journey." I slid the phone out of her reach, pushing it closer to the center of the table. "Go ahead, Mr. Sterling," I said, my tone as level as a frozen lake. Richard and Evelyn Scott, the attorney, began addressing the two people sitting across from me. Let this serve as formal verbal confirmation. At precisely midnight this morning, the age restriction on the Harrison Trust expired. The $4.2 million principal was legally secured and transferred into a protected corporate vault. You no longer possess any discretionary access to those assets. Richard made a sound like a punctured tire. All the air rushed out of his lungs in a single ragged exhale. He slumped backward, his spine curving, his posture crumbling in an instant. His expensive tailored suit suddenly looked 3 sizes too big. He clutched his chest, gasping for oxygen as the reality of his ruin crashed down upon him. He was a man who owed a balloon payment to a violent syndicate, and his only escape route had just been sealed shut forever. Furthermore, Sterling continued his tone unyielding. My office has filed a formal injunction against all your domestic accounts. We conducted a forensic audit of the joint checking profile you established using my client's stolen identity. We have turned over 12 years of forged disbursement requests to the state prosecutor. The assets are frozen pending a felony fraud investigation. Law enforcement currently holds the file. While the lawyer delivered the final devastating blow, I looked down at the table. Resting beside the folder was the heavy, polished fountain pen. It was the exact instrument of my mother's deception. I picked it up. The casing felt cold and substantial in my grip. I looked Evelyn directly in the eyes. I wrapped both hands around the barrel of the pen. I applied steady, deliberate pressure. The thick resin snapped. The sharp crack echoed through the dining room, cutting through the sound of Richard's panicked breathing. A hidden cartridge inside the barrel ruptured, spilling a pool of bright teal ink across my fingers. I opened my hands and dropped the broken plastic shards onto the fraudulent limited liability contract. The vibrant ink bled into the paper, staining Richard's printed name and ruining the document just as thoroughly as they had tried to ruin my future. The prolonged silence in the room finally shattered. The extended family erupted into a chaotic symphony of horrified whispers. Aunt Miriam covered her face, turning away from her brother in profound disgust. Uncle David stood up his chair, scraping harshly against the hardwood floor, demanding to know what Richard had done. The relatives, the very audience my parents had invited to force my compliance, became the jury witnessing their ultimate execution. Evelyn abandoned all pretense. The refined, controlled woman who hosted charity brunches ceased to exist. She leaned over the table, her face contorted with rage, screaming at the cell phone. "This is a lie," she shrieked, spittle flying from her lips. "You are a liar. We are her parents. We have rights to that money. We raised her." She slapped the table, her palms striking the spilled teal ink. The bright pigment smeared across her skin and stained the cuff of her pristine ivory sleeve. She looked deranged, unraveling in front of the specific high society relatives she had spent decades trying to impress. Her meticulously curated facade was completely annihilated, replaced by the greedy, desperate thief she had always been beneath the surface. For 12 years, they had treated me like a financial burden. They had allowed me to wear thrift store coats and work late shifts while they drained my grandfather's legacy to fund their own vanity. They had expected me to fold myself into a quiet, obedient shape forever. They thought I would surrender my independence just to keep the peace at the dinner table. They were wrong. The quiet, obedient daughter was gone. I did not stay to watch the rest of her tantrum. I picked up my cell phone, ending the call with a single tap of my thumb. I wiped the teal ink from my hands using a stark white linen napkin, folding it neatly and placing it next to my plate. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I reached for my wool coat draped over the back of my chair. I adjusted the collar, feeling a profound, cleansing relief wash over my shoulders. The heavy, invisible chains of my childhood lay broken on the floor of the steakhouse. I prepared to walk out the door and leave the wreckage behind, but the fallout in the private dining suite was far from over. The sound of the heavy wooden door closing behind Uncle David felt like a starting pistol. He could not stomach another second in the same room as a man who would steal from his own child. The swift departure of the family patriarch cracked the remaining fragile shell of civility in the private dining suite. The fallout cascaded through the room, rapid and brutal, tearing apart the remaining illusions. Harper shattered the stunned silence. She possessed a remarkable ability to center herself in any crisis, disregarding the legal peril her parents currently faced. She leaped out of her chair, knocking over a crystal water goblet. The ice cubes scattered across the mahogany table, pooling around the broken shards of the teal fountain pen. "Journey, you are ruining my life," Harper screamed, her voice climbing to a piercing register. The veins in her neck strained against her skin. She pointed a trembling finger at my chest. "How is the caterer supposed to get paid? What about the floral arrangements? The venue deposit is due on Monday. You have to tell that lawyer to release the money right now." My younger sister stood there demanding I hand over a stolen inheritance to fund a party. She did not express a single ounce of horror that our parents had committed identity theft. She did not care that Richard faced federal prison for embezzlement and bank fraud. Her entire universe was constructed of imported lace and country club reservations. She was the golden child, experiencing her first encounter with a consequence, and she reacted with pure, entitled rage. I looked at Harper, feeling a strange, hollow pity. She was a product of their design. Richard and Evelyn groomed her to believe she deserved the world on a silver platter, never teaching her how to earn a single dime. She was a hollow ornament, entirely dependent on a fraudulent foundation that had just collapsed beneath her designer heels. "You need to pay for your own wedding, Harper," I said, my tone flat, devoid of any familial warmth. "The Bank of Grandpa Harrison is permanently closed." A sharp movement caught my peripheral vision. Bryce, the loving fiancé, the slick corporate architect of the limited liability trap, was retreating. He did not rush to comfort his weeping bride. He did not step forward to defend his future in-laws. He physically backed away from the table, his expensive leather shoes scraping against the hardwood floor. He put 3 feet of distance between himself and the wreckage of the Scott family. I watched his face transition through a rapid sequence of calculations. Bryce was a predator who sought out vulnerable wealth. He had planned to marry into a $4.2 million windfall, using his minor partnership shares in the LLC to fund his sports cars and custom suits. Now he was staring at a table stained with teal ink and listening to a lawyer outline an active felony fraud investigation. The massive payday he banked his future upon had just mutated into a toxic federal crime scene. A man like Bryce avoided legal liability like the plague. He knew the state prosecutors would audit every single document associated with the fraudulent LLC. His name was on those papers. If he stayed married into this family, the investigators would scrutinize his own commercial real estate dealings. He would become a target. Bryce made his decision in a matter of seconds. He looked at Harper. He did not offer a word of comfort. He did not apologize. He simply turned around, buttoned his tailored suit jacket, and walked toward the exit. He moved with a fast, purposeful stride, eager to put as much distance between himself and the impending indictments as possible. Harper watched him leave, her mouth falling open in a silent scream. "Bryce!" she gasped, stumbling forward a few steps. "Bryce, wait, where are you going? We have to figure out the venue deposit." He did not look back. The heavy oak door swung shut behind him, cutting off her desperate plea. He abandoned her, right there, in the middle of a steakhouse, proving unequivocally that his affection possessed a specific dollar value. He only ever loved my inheritance. The moment the money vanished, his devotion evaporated with it. The reality of the abandonment struck Harper like a physical blow. The illusion of her perfect, curated existence shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She sank to the floor, the expensive silk of her cocktail dress pooling around her knees. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically, her shoulders shaking with violent tremors. She was a spoiled princess, suddenly exiled from her castle, weeping for a prince who was never real to begin with. I surveyed the rest of the room. The remaining aunts and uncles were migrating toward the exit, gathering their coats and purses in grim silence. They refused to look at Richard or Evelyn. Grandpa Harrison had been a beloved patriarch, a man who worked tirelessly to build a legacy for his descendants. The realization that his own son had plundered that legacy, treating it as a personal slush fund to cover embezzlement debts, sickened the extended family. They viewed my parents not with pity, but with absolute, unadulterated disgust. Richard remained slumped in his chair, his chin resting on his chest, unable to meet the eyes of his siblings. Evelyn stood near the center of the table, still clutching the stained napkin, her makeup running in dark streaks down her face. She looked pathetic, a deposed queen reigning over a pile of broken plastic and fraudulent contracts. I felt no desire to gloat. I did not need to yell or demand apologies. The universe was currently delivering a punishment far more severe than any reprimand I could articulate. I had simply removed the curtain and allowed the light to expose the rot underneath. I reached into my wool coat pocket and pulled out my wallet. I extracted a crisp $50 bill and placed it on the white tablecloth next to my half-empty glass of iced tea. It was enough to cover my portion of the meal and a generous tip for the waiter who would have to clean up the spilled water. I turned my back on the people who sold my future. I walked out of the private dining suite, leaving the sound of Harper's hysterical sobbing and the heavy, suffocating silence of my parents' ruin behind me. I pushed through the main doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the cool Ohio night. The damp autumn air rushed into my lungs, cleansing my system. The streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, glowing like beacons, leading me away from a 30-year nightmare. I unlocked my sedan, sliding into the driver's seat with a profound sense of lightness. I turned the key, the engine humming to life. I merged onto the dark highway, heading toward my quiet apartment. The battle inside the steakhouse was over, but the war was far from finished. The destruction of a 12-year criminal enterprise rarely ends with a dramatic dinner exit. The legal machinery I had set in motion was a slow, grinding beast, and the consequences of Richard and Evelyn's actions were just beginning to surface in the harsh light of day. They were about to discover exactly how cold the world becomes when you run out of stolen money to burn. The morning after the dinner at the steakhouse, I woke up in my own bed. The early autumn sunlight filtered through the horizontal blinds of my bedroom, casting pale golden stripes across the floor. I lay there for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside my window. The crushing weight of impending confrontation was gone. The heavy dread that used to accompany the start of every day had simply evaporated. I rolled over and picked up my cell phone from the nightstand. The screen illuminated, displaying a staggering number of notifications. 47 missed calls. Every single one originated from Evelyn. I opened the visual voicemail log. I did not press play. Listening to her voice felt entirely unnecessary when the transcription software provided a stark visual record of her psychological descent. The blocks of text charted a rapid downward spiral. The first few messages attempted a return to her gaslighting tactics, demanding I call the lawyer and correct my terrible misunderstanding. By the 20th message, the tone shifted into frantic weeping, begging me to save their home. By the final message, the desperation curdled into vitriolic rage. The transcription captured fractured sentences filled with curses and promises of eternal damnation. I stared at the block letters on the glowing screen. I did not feel a spike of adrenaline. I highlighted the entire list and tapped the delete icon. The 47 voicemails vanished into the digital trash bin. The screen cleared. I set the phone face down on the mattress and went into the kitchen to brew coffee. The destruction of my parents' shadow empire proceeded with a terrifying velocity over the next 7 days. When you build a life entirely on stolen capital and predatory leverage, the foundation does not crack slowly. It shatters all at once. Thomas Sterling provided clinical updates throughout the week, acting as a secure firewall between me and the wreckage. The fallout began with the unregulated debt. Without the $4.2 million injection from the trust, Richard missed the balloon payment to his creditors. The high-interest lenders he met in diner parking lots did not respect corporate grace periods. They operated on strict, punitive timelines. On Tuesday night, a heavy tow truck arrived at the vanilla-scented suburban house. Men wearing dark, heavy work jackets did not bother ringing the doorbell. They simply hooked up Richard's luxury SUV and hauled it away, leaving grease stains on the pristine concrete driveway. They stripped his remaining liquid assets, draining the offshore accounts he used to hide his consulting fees to satisfy a fraction of his debt. The confident suburban patriarch was reduced to a frightened debtor peering through his own living room blinds. The legitimate financial institutions moved with a slower but far more devastating bureaucratic efficiency. Sterling's injunction paralyzed the joint checking account, triggering an immediate automated audit by First Ohio. The bank executives quickly realized they had facilitated a 12-year identity theft operation. To limit their own institutional liability, they moved swiftly and mercilessly against my parents. On Thursday afternoon, a process server walked up the brick pathway of my childhood home. He handed Evelyn a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy, formal paper. It was a notice of foreclosure. The secondary mortgages Richard took out to fund his earlier restitution payments were now entirely unserviceable. Because the initial collateral was tied to fraudulent income streams, the bank demanded immediate possession of the property. The house where I grew up, the house where Evelyn burned $80 candles and hosted charity brunches, no longer belonged to them. The financial ruin was merely the prologue to the criminal reckoning. On Friday morning, 2 investigators from the state prosecutor's office arrived at the front door. They wore plain suits and carried briefcases filled with photocopies of the forged disbursement requests. The bright teal ink Evelyn used to sign my name provided a flawless, undeniable paper trail of felony fraud. The state board officially opened a criminal inquiry into identity theft and embezzlement. The detectives confiscated my parents' passports, preventing any attempt at flight. Richard and Evelyn were forced to hire a low-tier defense attorney, using the final remnants of their maxed-out credit cards. They began preparing for a trial that carried mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. The collateral damage consumed the golden child with equal severity. Harper's curated fairy tale evaporated in a matter of hours. With Bryce gone and the venue deposits bouncing, the 6-figure country club wedding was permanently canceled. The boutique manager seized her custom lace dresses. The florists refused to return her calls. Harper could no longer reside in the foreclosed family home, and her parents could no longer subsidize her existence. For the first time in her 26 years, she had to secure her own housing. Without a college degree or a functional resume, she qualified only for a minimum wage retail position at a local shopping mall. She moved into a cramped ground-floor apartment in a deteriorating complex near the interstate highway. The imported lace and European vacations were replaced by stained linoleum countertops and the relentless drone of passing semi-trucks. The illusion she felt so deeply entitled to shattered, leaving her stranded in the harsh reality of the working class she used to mock. She was completely cut off from the luxury that defined her identity, forced to calculate the cost of groceries instead of bridal alterations. The social execution matched the financial destruction perfectly. The extended family excised Richard and Evelyn with surgical precision. Aunt Miriam blocked their phone numbers. Uncle David sent a brief, formal email severing all future contact on behalf of the entire paternal bloodline. Evelyn's tennis partners stopped returning her calls. The women who used to admire her floral arrangements now whispered about her impending indictment in the aisles of the local grocery store. The country club revoked their membership due to unpaid dues and the looming public scandal. They became pariahs in their own community, exiled from the wealthy social circles they had sacrificed their own daughter to impress. They were isolated, trapped inside a foreclosed house, waiting for the trial date to arrive. I observed the collapse of their empire from a safe distance. Sitting in my quiet classroom grading sophomore history essays, I monitored the fallout without a single shred of guilt. I did not feel a triumphant, soaring joy. Revenge is often portrayed as a fiery, explosive emotion, but true justice feels much colder. I felt a profound, cleansing relief. A heavy toxic fog had finally lifted from my lungs, allowing me to draw a full, unobstructed breath for the first time in my adult life. The cycle of manipulation that defined my entire existence lay dismantled. Richard and Evelyn spent 12 years treating me like a naive pawn. They gambled their entire freedom on my compliance. They assumed I would remain the quiet, agreeable daughter, forever swallowing their lies to keep the peace. They weaponized my silence, assuming it meant I was ignorant to their theft. They failed to understand a fundamental truth. My silence was never a symptom of obedience. It was a strategic retreat. It was a period of careful observation and meticulous preparation. My silence gave me the time and the cover to build the legal fortress that ultimately destroyed them. The very trait they exploited became the exact weapon of their ruin. The storm had passed, leaving the ground swept clean. The wreckage of the Scott family was contained within the borders of their own making. I closed my lesson planner and looked at the clock on the classroom wall, marking the end of the school day. I packed my canvas tote bag, preparing to walk out into the crisp Ohio afternoon. The battle was over. The enemy was defeated. But the true reward of this entire ordeal was just beginning to take shape, waiting for me in the quiet moments of my newly reclaimed life. 6 months passed. The brutal Ohio winter surrendered to a mild, forgiving spring, washing the city in pale greens and soft sunlight. The passage of time did not possess a magical erasing quality, but it offered a steady, reliable distance from the wreckage of the autumn. Healing from 12 years of psychological manipulation is not a sudden revelation. It is a slow, clumsy untangling of deeply rooted instincts. For the first 2 months, I woke up every morning at 6 o'clock, my heart racing, my chest tight, bracing for an impending catastrophe. My brain possessed a rigid muscle memory of anxiety. I expected to find my cell phone flooded with frantic demands from Evelyn. I expected to look out my window and see Richard pounding on my door. The quiet void left behind by their absence initially felt terrifying, because peace was an entirely foreign environment. I had spent my entire adult life navigating a minefield, so walking on clear, open ground felt like a trick. Whenever that phantom dread crept into my throat, I utilized a grounding technique my new therapist taught me. I placed my bare feet flat against the hardwood floor. I focused on the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I reminded myself that the legal vault was sealed. The shadow empire was dismantled. The threat was neutralized. The quiet was not an ambush waiting to happen. The quiet was simply my own life finally returning to me. I did not use my grandfather's legacy to purchase a sprawling mansion or a fleet of imported sports cars. I possessed zero desire to emulate the gaudy, sterile aesthetic my parents worshipped. I craved authenticity. I craved a space that felt warm, lived in, and secure. In early February, I closed on a modest 1920s craftsman bungalow nestled in a historic tree-lined neighborhood. The house featured original oak floorboards, a brick fireplace, and a wide wraparound front porch. It felt remarkably solid. The true treasure of the property lay hidden in the backyard. A sprawling, overgrown garden stretched toward a tall wooden privacy fence. I spent my weekends kneeling in the damp soil, pulling weeds, and planting hydrangeas and heirloom tomatoes. Grandpa Harrison loved to garden. Before my father isolated him from our daily lives, I remembered spending hot July afternoons at his house, watching him carefully prune his rose bushes. He taught a 7-year-old version of me how to pack the dirt around the roots and water the fragile stems. Working in the soil of my new home became a physical, tactile meditation. It was a daily tribute to the man who saw my worth when the rest of my bloodline viewed me as a disposable asset. Despite achieving absolute financial independence, I did not draft a resignation letter. I continued driving to the public high school every single morning. I stood in front of my whiteboard teaching sophomore history, explaining the rise and fall of ancient empires. The routine anchored me. My career was the one aspect of my identity that Richard and Evelyn never managed to corrupt. I loved my students. I loved the chaotic energy of the crowded hallways. I loved watching a teenager suddenly grasp a complex geopolitical concept. Walking away from my vocation would have felt like surrendering a piece of my soul. However, the vast corporate vault containing $4.2 million demanded a purposeful direction. I refused to let the capital stagnate in a portfolio collecting dust. I scheduled a meeting with Thomas Sterling in his downtown glass office. The dynamic of our interaction shifted entirely. We were no longer fighting a defensive war against domestic thieves. We were moving on to the offensive. "I want to build a shield, Mr. Sterling," I told him, sitting across the polished mahogany desk. My parents used my proximity and my trust as weapons. There are thousands of young adults out there right now whose parents are ruining their credit, hijacking their inheritances, or draining their financial futures. They do not know how to fight back. because the criminals share their last name. Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, a rare, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. A legal defense foundation. He summarized his sharp mind, already calculating the corporate structure. We spent the next 3 weeks drafting the charter for the Harrison Initiative. I dedicated a significant fraction of my trust yield to fund the project. The foundation provided pro bono legal retainers, forensic accounting services, and credit restoration for victims of familial financial abuse. We hired a dedicated team of junior litigators to prosecute predatory parents and secure injunctions for vulnerable young adults. I did not attach my own name to the organization. I operated quietly in the background, signing the funding authorizations and reviewing the success metrics. I passed my grandfather's protection forward, offering a lifeline to people trapped in the exact same nightmare I had just survived. The money stopped being a source of hidden anxiety and transformed into an instrument of profound structural change. While I focused on building a sanctuary, the state prosecutors focused on dismantling my parents' freedom. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon in late April, my cell phone vibrated on my kitchen counter. The caller identification displayed Sterling's office line. I answered the call, pouring a glass of filtered water. The district attorney finalized the trial schedule, Miss Scott. Sterling announced his tone shifting into his formal courtroom register. The criminal proceedings against Richard and Evelyn commence next month. The state possesses an airtight evidentiary file. The bank records, the forged signatures, and the illicit wire transfers paint a devastating portrait of felony embezzlement. A slight tension rippled through my shoulders, an old echo of fear reacting to their names. What is the projected outcome, I asked, staring out the kitchen window at the blooming hydrangeas. The defense attorney they retained is attempting to negotiate a plea agreement to avoid a prolonged public trial, Sterling explained. However, the prosecutors are demanding mandatory custodial sentences. The sheer duration of the identity theft elevates the severity of the charges. They are both facing significant prison terms. Sterling paused, allowing the weight of the information to settle. The district attorney requested I reach out to you. As the primary victim of the fraud, you possess the right to submit a formal impact statement to the judge. You can deliver it in person during the sentencing hearing or file a written affidavit detailing the psychological and financial damage they inflicted upon you. The request hung in the air, presenting a final opportunity for direct confrontation. I pictured a crowded courtroom. I pictured Richard in an ill-fitting suit, his arrogant posture broken. I pictured Evelyn, stripped of her luxury accessories, facing a judge in a sterile municipal building. I imagined standing at a wooden podium, speaking the truth into a microphone, ensuring my pain was permanently recorded in the legal archives. I took a slow sip of my water. I searched my chest for the familiar burning anger, the righteous indignation that fueled my survival during those grueling 28 days. I found nothing. The reservoir of rage was completely dry. The venom had evaporated, leaving behind a vast, tranquil indifference. I do not wish to submit a statement, Mr. Sterling, I replied, my voice steady and light. I have nothing left to say to them. Are you certain, Journée, a victim impact statement can offer a powerful sense of closure? I already have my closure, I stated, setting the glass down on the granite counter. Testifying implies that I still care about their understanding of my pain. I do not care. Whatever the judge decides is between them and the state of Ohio. My involvement ended the moment the injunction triggered. I ended the call feeling a profound, subtle shift in my internal gravity. I did not hate the people who raised me. Hate requires a sustained emotional investment. Hate tethers you to the target of your anger. I simply felt an absolute, enduring apathy. They were strangers who made disastrous choices, and they were currently reaping the bitter harvest of those decisions. I did not destroy them. I merely refused to serve as their human shield any longer. I stepped out of the way and handed them the unfiltered consequences of their own actions. The following morning broke clear and brilliant. I woke up at 7 o'clock feeling rested and remarkably unburdened. I walked into the kitchen wearing a comfortable, oversized sweater. I brewed a pot of dark roast coffee, the rich, bitter aroma filling the hallway. I poured the steaming liquid into a heavy ceramic mug. I unlocked the back door and stepped out onto the sprawling wooden porch overlooking the garden. The air felt crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and budding jasmine. A pair of cardinals chirped from the branches of a towering oak tree near the privacy fence. The neighborhood remained quiet, bathed in the soft, hazy light of early dawn. I sat down in a cushioned wicker chair, bringing the warm mug to my lips. I closed my eyes, listening to the rustle of the leaves. I experienced a sensation so pure and untainted, it almost felt miraculous. I sat on my own porch, drinking my own coffee, completely devoid of manipulation, gaslighting, or dread. No one was demanding my signature. No one was evaluating my worth based on my compliance. The elaborate, exhausting performance of the quiet, obedient daughter was permanently retired. Society often preaches that family is defined by blood, that biology dictates an unbreakable, mandatory loyalty. That is a dangerous, comfortable lie designed to protect predators hiding in plain sight. Family is not determined by a shared last name. Family is defined by who protects you when you are vulnerable. Grandpa Harrison protected me from the grave. I protected myself in the present. The $4.2 million gave me the logistical security to escape the trap, but the money was never the true prize. The truth was the ultimate victory. The truth dismantled the shadow empire. The truth severed the toxic chains. The truth gave me my life back. And sitting on that porch, surrounded by the quiet hum of a spring morning, I knew exactly how I intended to live it. I look out over the expanse of my backyard garden. The morning sun climbs steadily above the wooden privacy fence, casting long golden shadows across the damp grass. The light hits the wide wooden planks of my back porch, warming the cedar boards beneath my bare feet. I take a slow, deliberate sip of dark roast coffee. The heavy ceramic mug warms my palms, providing a comforting, tangible weight against my skin. A cool spring breeze rustles the leaves of the towering oak tree, sending a shower of pale green helicopter seeds drifting down onto the lawn. For 30 years, my entire existence was defined by reduction. I thought being a good daughter meant making myself small so my parents could feel big. I folded my ambitions into neat, invisible squares. I lowered my voice. I accepted the meager scraps they pushed across the dining room table and convinced myself I was consuming a feast. I operated under the fundamental delusion that obedience was the exact same thing as love. Society trains women to act as shock absorbers for their families. We are taught from a very young age to swallow our grievances to maintain a pristine, polished surface. Evelyn and Richard built a towering monument to their own vanity, and they used my endless compliance as the mortar to hold the bricks together. Whenever I felt a flicker of resentment regarding my grueling diner shifts or my crippling student loans, I buried the emotion under a thick layer of manufactured guilt. I told myself I was selfish for wanting more. I convinced myself that their financial struggles were authentic, and my sacrifice was a necessary duty. They weaponized my inherent empathy. They turned my natural desire to be a supportive, reliable child into an engine for their own lavish survival. But Grandpa Harrison knew the crucial difference between control and affection. He sat quietly during those holiday dinners, observing the subtle, insidious dynamics playing out across the table. He saw Richard interrupting me whenever I tried to share an accomplishment. He noticed Evelyn dismissing my teaching career while she praised Harper's latest luxury purchase. He watched them groom my younger sister for a life of entitlement while conditioning me for a life of servitude. He recognized that true love does not demand your silence. A genuine family does not steal your future to fund their present aesthetic. He understood that he could not change his son. He knew Richard was too deeply entrenched in his own greed, and Evelyn was too addicted to her country club status. So my grandfather did the only thing a true protector could do. He bypassed the predators entirely. He reached across the boundary of his own mortality and handed me a weapon. The $4.2 million trust was not merely a financial windfall. It was a fortress. It was an arsenal of independence. But an arsenal is entirely useless if the soldier refuses to pick up the sword. He left me the tools, but I was the one who had to learn how to wield them. I had to shed the identity of the quiet, accommodating victim. I had to sit in a glass office and strategize with a corporate litigator. I had to stand in a bridal boutique, look my mother directly in the eyes while she held a forged document, and deny her the satisfaction of my signature. I had to endure the terrifying sound of fists hitting my apartment door and respond with absolute, unyielding silence. I had to orchestrate a public execution of their shadow empire without raising my voice a single decibel. I learned how to fight a war without firing a single shot. I simply allowed the truth to act as the gravity that pulled their house of cards down to the earth. I push my foot lightly against the porch floorboards. The wooden swing glides backward and forward in a smooth, hypnotic arc. A soft, rhythmic creak emanates from the metal chains secured to the awning above. The sound is rustic and melodic. It matches the steady, peaceful beating of my own heart. There is no racing pulse. There is no sudden spike of adrenaline. The nervous system that spent 3 decades preparing for a sudden disaster is finally learning how to rest. Many people believe forgiveness is the only path to inner peace. They argue that holding on to estrangement is a form of bitterness that poisons the soul. I reject that philosophy entirely. Walking away from an active burning building is not a symptom of bitterness. It is an act of basic survival. I do not owe my parents a relationship simply because we share a genetic sequence. Forgiveness implies a restoration of trust, and you cannot restore trust with individuals who view your existence as a blank check. My days are no longer dictated by their manufactured emergencies. I do not receive frantic demands to subsidize floral arrangements. I do not receive threatening text messages from entitled men trying to extort my career. Meanwhile, my focus remains firmly pointed forward. The Legal Defense Foundation we established is already processing its first wave of clients. Last week, Thomas Sterling assigned a junior litigator to represent a 19-year-old college student whose mother decimated her credit score by opening 6 fraudulent credit cards in her name. We are providing that young woman with the same sharp, unyielding legal representation Sterling provided me. We are freezing those accounts. We are teaching her how to snap the teal pens of her own oppressors. We are showing her that she does not have to set herself on fire to keep her relatives warm. I look out at the blooming hydrangeas. The morning sun clears the privacy fence, bathing the entire garden in brilliant, unfiltered light. I take one last sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark flavor. If you have listened this far, I want to say thank you. I am sharing this chapter of my life because I know my story is not a solitary phenomenon. I know there are daughters out there right now, sitting at kitchen tables, biting their tongues until they bleed, just to keep the peace in houses that are already at war. You are dimming your own light because you are conditioned to believe your brightness causes friction. You are absorbing the emotional and financial debts of the people who were supposed to protect you. You are carrying a burden that was never yours to bear. So I have a vital question for you. Drop the word free in the comments if you have ever had to walk away from toxicity to save yourself. If you have ever had to draw a hard line in the sand and let the people you loved stand on the other side of it. I read every single response. I want to see how many of us have broken the cycle. You are not crazy. You are not ungrateful. And you are certainly not alone. The truth is a slow, methodical force, but it always arrives exactly when it is meant to. Reclaiming your life is the most terrifying, magnificent choice you will ever make. See you in the next one.